What's up, everybody? Renfell here, aka Tim Anderson, although it should be probably aka in the other direction. Anyway, back for another Mondays in Middle-earth episode. We are working our way through the appendices of the Return of the King for the Lord of the Rings. And we're currently still in the first Appendix A, Part 4, Gondor and the Heirs of Anárion. So, last week we covered the heirs of Isildur, but now we're moving on to the other brother and the other side of things. And we're going to be going on through here. Now, if you haven't watched this series yet, we started with The Hobbit, read our way through The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, The Lord of the Rings with a chapter-by-chapter analysis. We're currently working our way through the appendices, and we will then be moving into the Silmarillion. These episodes come out every Monday around 9 a.m., 10 a.m. Central Time. And yeah, it's a weekly thing that we've been doing for more than a year now, and we're going to continue on until we're done with the Silmarillion. So if you like that, it sounds fun and everything else, like, subscribe, hit the bell icon. Shout out to all of our supporters. There will be a commercial break somewhere in between where we'll do a full shout out for all of our guild captains and everything else here on YouTube. So stick around for that. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and get started reading Part 4 of Appendix A, Gondor and the Heirs of Anárion. So it says here there were 31 kings in Gondor after Anarion, who was slain before the Barad-dûr. It says, though war never ceased on the borders of their kingdom for more than 1,000 years. That's a long time. I think some people, when you read this, you don't really get an understanding or grasp the length of history that Tolkien had put into the Lord of the Rings until you start digging into the appendices and then go into the Silmarillion. I would say the average casual reader, someone like my wife, for example, who's really never read the books, she's started the books, she's watched the films a bunch of times, she's never going to know that Tolkien created this legendarium, this huge, vast history. But for those of us who do like this kind of stuff, it's here for us to read through. It says, more than 1,000 years, the Dunedain of the south grew in wealth and power by land and sea until the reign of Atanatar II, called Alcaran the Glorious, yet the signs of decay had by then already appeared, which is typical for any kingdom that rules for any length of time. Power corrupts. Also says here, the men of the south married late, their children were few, and then they had a childless king, Phalister. Then there was one called Narmasil I, the son of Atanatar Alcaran. Childless kings, not good. You can't further the lineage at that point. It was Ossothur VII who built Minas Anor, where the kings originally dwelt during the summertime rather than in Osgiliath. It says, at this time Gondor was attacked for the first time by the wild men of the east, but Terrastar, the sun, defeated them, took the name Romandasil East Victor, but he was later then slain by the Easterlings. When Terranor, the 12th king, began the line of the Ship Kings, who built navies and extended the sway of Gondor along the coasts in all directions, both west and south of the mouths of Anduin. It said that the Terranon took the name Phalister, Lord of the Coasts, or took the crown in the name of Phalister, Lord of the Coasts. Interesting. They talk here about how Eärnil, who succeeded him, who was his nephew, repaired the ancient haven of Pelargir and built a great navy. Pelargir is an interesting place because it does factor into the Lord of the Rings story as a harbor town, a seaport. But again, I'm going to talk more about Lord of the Rings Online because there's a really cool quest line that has you in the main quest as you're working your way through the main story. You eventually get to Pelargir, and there's a really important battle that takes place there, and you get to do a whole quest line during this siege, and it's when Aragorn is retaking it, going towards that battle at the end of the Return of the King. It's really cool the way it's done and the way it's laid out. It says here, the men of Harad, led by the lords that had been driven from Umbar, came up with great power against. I'm assuming this is Pelargir, yeah. And it says many years Umbar was invested, but could not be taken because of the sea power of Gondor. Until Cirihir, son of Cyrindil, actually it'd be Kirin, he does hard seas. Cirihir, son of Kirindil, bided his time. When he finally gathered his strength, he came down by the north from the north by sea and by land, crossed the river Hannon with his armies, and utterly defeated the men of the Herod. And the kings were finally compelled to acknowledge the leadership of Gondor. Ooh. He then took the name, I'm going to butcher this, Harmendisil, and it says his might was so great that no enemy dared to contest him for his entire reign, which was 134 years, which is pretty awesome. It says the longest reign of all but one in the line of Anárion. And during his time, Gondor actually reached the peak of its power and glory, which is really cool, extending north all the way to the Celebrant, and all the way to the southern eaves of Mirkwood, and then west to the Grey Flood, east to the Sea of Rhûn, south to the River Harnen, and along the coast to the peninsula and haven of Umbar, including the men of the Vales of Anduin who acknowledged his authority. And all the kings of Hera did homage to Gondor. Ooh, it says, whoa, this is a trip. I didn't know this. It says their sons lived as hostages in the court of Gondor under the king. That's a pretty barbaric custom to think about. You know, having the sons of your... It's effective, but barbaric when you think about it. It's kind of like saying, well, we're going to, your sons will have good lives, but they're going to stay with us. And if you ever do anything, yeah, your sons' lives are forfeit. That's messed up. What's up, Pippin? Come on. Come on. You want to come up here? You're all sorts of... She's being Twitter-pated today. Yes, go on bed. Go to sleep. I'll show you guys real quick. She's just... I don't know why, but she's very restless today. And she's, like, roaming around. There's Sam. Ooh, got the light is right there. There's Frodo. Sorry, that's Luke, not Frodo. I got Smeagol right over here, though, by me. In his customary position. Sorry, guys. Sidetracked with cats. Barbaric customs. It says Mordor was desolate during this time, but was kept watch over by the great fortresses that guarded the passes. Things that dwell there. Finally, the line of the ship kings ended. It said here that under Atanatar, son of Harmendisil, they lived in such splendor that it was said that precious stones are pebbles in Gondor for children to play with. But Atanatar loved luxury, essentially, and did nothing to maintain the kingdom that he had inherited from his father, and neither did his two sons, and thus began the decline of Gondor, because they just wanted to sit on that pile of money and not do anything with it. Trust fund babies is what they were. It's unfortunate. They also stopped watching Gondor. Very interesting. It says, but it wasn't until the days of Valakar that the first great evil came to Gondor, which was the civil war of the Kinstrife, in which great loss and ruin was caused, and it never fully recovered after that. Says here that this is where we get into the boring things. It's mentioning lots of names which don't necessarily mean anything, but it's interesting to watch the history of Gondor without needing to know the names per se. So in 1240, Narmacil made Minalcar regent of the realm, and he governed Gondor in the name of the kings. And his chief concern was the Northmen, who had greatly increased in power during the peaceful times. They gave them lands beyond the Anduin, south of Greenwood the Great, to be a defense against Man of the East. And they came back during the time of Narmacil I. However, the Northmen did not necessarily always remain true, and some joined the Easterlings. So during this time, Minalcar went forth, destroyed the armies, took the name Harmendisil, and on his return, he fortified the shores of Anduin and built Well, it says here he forbade any strangers to pass down the river beyond the Eman Muil, and then built the pillars of the Argonath at the entrance to Nen Hithwil. But it says he needed men, so he took Northmen into his service and gave some of them rank, especially to Vidugavia, who aided him in the war, who called himself the King of Anárion. Ooh. So Ramendistil sent his son to live with the Northmen because he knew their language, their customs, and so on and so forth. But he grew to love the land of the Northmen more than his home, and he ended up marrying Vidumavi, who's the daughter of Vidugavia. And it says here, this is the marriage from which came the kin strife. Because he's, he went native, no speaking. There's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I don't mean that in a negative term. I've gone native. I moved to Mexico, married a Mexican, got permanent residency in Mexico, and I go up to visit the United States, but I don't know that we will ever live there, for lots and lots of reasons. But that's just, we're going native. It says here the men of Gondor already looked askance at the Northmen among them, and it was unheard of that the son of the king or any heir of a king would wed one of the. Ooh, the wording here. This is where some people have issues with Tolkien and say it's problematic because he uses these types of words. The way he phrases this is important. The people were freaked out by this because it was unheard of that the heir of the crown or any son of the king would wed one of a lesser and alien race. And that's type of wording that people get offended by in the modern era because they're like, oh, that's racist. Yeah, it's racism. It's absolutely racism. Racism exists in history whether you want it to or not, whether you are offended by it or not. It doesn't matter your feelings about it. It's a fact of history, and it's no different here in the world of Middle Earth. So there's some issues here because it says Valakar grew old, but his queen did not because she died because she was one of the lesser race. Again, Númenóreans live a long time compared to those of lesser men. And it says here the Dunedain were fearful that their descendants, the descendants of the king, of that king and his short-lived wife, would prove to be the same. And it says here, fall from the majesty of the kings of men. They were also unwilling to accept her son as lord. Though who is now called Eldakar had been born in an alien country and was named in his youth Vinatharia, which is the name of his mother's people. So, born in another culture, embracing of that culture, even though he had taken a modern name from the Gondorian people, they didn't view him as such. When he succeeded his father, there was war in Gondor. But it says here he did not prove easy to thrust from his heritage, because to the lineage of Gondor he added the fiercity of the Northmen. He was handsome and valiant, and showed no sign of aging more swiftly than his father, so the genes of the Númenóreans ran strong in him. But he was eventually besieged in Osgiliath, and though he held it long, eventually hunger and the greater forces of the rebels drove him out, and the city was left in flames. It was during the siege that the tower of the dome of Osgiliath was destroyed and the palantir there lost in the waters. I didn't remember that, so that's really cool to read this because it's showing us the fate of one of the other palantir. However, he escaped and eluded his enemies and eventually fled to the north of the land of his mother's people. And it says both the Northmen in service of Gondor and the northern Dunedain accepted him. Ooh, this is when we talk about the usurper Castamir, grandson of Kalimitar, younger brother of Ramendistil II. He was captain of ships, supported by the people of the coasts of the great havens of Pelargir and Umbar. Castamir plays an important role in the storyline I was talking about earlier in Lord of the Rings Online. Castamir was cruel. He captured Orendil, son of Eldakar, and put him to death. Ugh. Ooh, and it says he slaughtered everybody in Osgiliath. And it says the slaughter destruction exceeded the needs of war. So this is Tolkien's way of it saying, anytime you're going to take a city, there's going to be bloodshed. However, wanton bloodshed or the needless sacrifice of people and just killing everyone for the sake of killing is something that's corrupt above and beyond, and that's what Castamere did. This was also, it says here, remembered in Minas Anor and Ithilien, and the love of Castamere was great lessened when people saw that he didn't really care about the land or its people and was only thinking about the fleets and the ships and wanted to dominate everything. And this is when the people begin to rise up and think about removing the king's seat to Pelargir. Hey everyone, Renfail here with the commercial part of the video where I say, hey, if you like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that bell icon so you never miss an update. And thanks to all of our supporters are here on YouTube and over on Patreon, our highest members, our guild champions, Crazy's Relative, Remy D here on YouTube. And don't forget, if you want to support, it's really easy. You can do the memberships below, the Adventurers Guild, 3 different tiers. There's also the super thanks on any uploaded video or YouTube short that you find. There's also, of course, the super chats and stickers that you could do on any live stream or premiere, and the Patreon page if you want to dive into the fantasy world that I have with my brother and my wife, which is a tabletop game, a point-and-click adventure game, and a fantasy book series. All are great ways to keep this channel going and me going full-time. Thanks again for those of you who support. Let's get back to the video that you're watching now. Oh no, hang on. I misread that. Castamere wanted to move the king's seat to Pelargir. After 10 years of him being king, here comes Eldacar with a great army out of the north, and people flocked to him because they saw him as the rightful king. And he slew Castamere in combat, avenged his son. However, Castamere's sons escaped, along with many of the ships in their fleet. And they held out in Pelargir. It says here Eldacar had no ships to beset them by sea, so they sailed away and established themselves at Umbar. So they fled and basically set up an independent kingdom. And it says Umbar remained at war with Gondor for many lives of men, a threat to its coastlands and all the traffic in the sea. And it was never again completely subdued until the days of Elisar. And the region of South Gondor became a debatable land between Corsairs and the Kings, which also plays into what's going on in The Lord of the Rings Online when you're going through Southern Gondor. Interesting thing, because the Corsairs are there raiding. I love how all this stuff we're reading plays back into Lord of the Rings Online. Sorry, guys, I know I rant about that MMO a lot. Okay, it says the loss of Umbar was an issue to Gondor. Not because just of the land and everything else, but it was here that Al-Pharazôn, the golden last king of Numenor, had landed and humbled the might of Sauron. So it had a cultural significance and a legendary significance as well in terms of historical context. Oh, this is interesting. I don't remember this at all. It says this was where the followers of Elendil remembered with pride the coming of the great host of Ar-Pharazôn, and on the hill above they set a great white pillar as a monument, which was crowned with a globe of crystal that took the rays of the sun and the moon and shone like a bright star that could be seen in clear weather even to the coast of Gondor and far out to the western sea. And it stood until the second rising of Sauron. However, this was quickly approaching, and Umbar fell under the domination of Sauron's servants, and he threw down that memorial because it was a remembrance of his humiliation at the hands of men. So once Eldacar returned, the bloodlines began to mingle even more, which to some was, it's a mingling with lesser men, and it diminished the line. It said it didn't happen at first as quickly as people thought, but it did eventually happen little by little. And it says here, this is an interesting way that Tolkien writes this. For no doubt it was due above all to Middle-earth itself and to the slow withdrawing of the gifts of the Númenóreans after the downfall of the Land of the Star. Eldacar lived to be 235 and was king for 58 years, of which 10 were spent in exile. But then the second and greatest evil came upon Gondor in the reign of Telemnar, the 26th king, whose father, Menardil, son of Eldacar, was slain at Pelargir by the Corsairs of Umbar. Then came a plague out of the east. The king and all of his children died, along with a ton of people from Gondor, mostly those who lived in Osgiliath. And it said, in weariness and fewness of men, the watch on Mordor ceased, and the fortresses that guarded the pass were unmanned, which allowed Sauron and his minions to begin to creepy crawly back in. When Telemar died, the white tree of Minas Anor also withered and died, but Terendor, his nephew, replanted a seedling at the citadel, and it was he who removed the king's house permanently to Minas Anor, for Osgiliath was now mostly deserted and began to fall into ruin. It says Terendor had the longest reign of all the kings of Gondor, but achieved little more than recording of his realm within, and the slow nursing of its strength. But his son began to gather his forces, raid the coast, and took Umbar by storm. And during this war, the descendants of Castamir were taken out. Umbar was held for a time, but then lost again to the men of the Herod. Then it said there was the third evil, the invasion of the Wain Riders. I don't remember this at all. Who sapped the strength of Gondor in wars that lasted almost 100 years. It says here they were a confederacy of people that came from the east. Their chieftains fought in chariots. They killed the king. The king's son fought back, avenged his father. Gathered the kingdoms again to become a single power. Okay, and here the Wain Riders made an alliance with Mordor. More kings died in battle. On the death of Onduir and his sons, it says here, Arvidue of the Northern Kingdoms claimed the crown of Gondor, as he was a direct descendant of Isildur. However, the claim was rejected, and Pelennor, the steward of the king, played the chief part, answering, the crown and royalty of Gondor belongs solely to the heirs of Menildil, son of Anárion, to whom Isildur relinquished this realm. In Gondor, this heritage is reckoned through sons only, and we have not heard that the law is otherwise in Arnor. And it says, Arvidue replied, Elendil had 2 sons, of whom Isildur was the elder and the heir of his father. We have heard that the name of Elendil stands to this day. When he still lived, the conjoint rule of the south was committed to his sons. Isildur took it up when Elendil fell. He did not relinquish his royalty in Gondor, nor intend that the realm of Elendil should be divided forever. It says, moreover, in Numenor of old, the scepter descended to the eldest child of the king, whether man or woman. And while it is true that the law has not been observed in the lands of exile, such was the law of our people, to which we now refer, seeing that all the sons of Onduir have died childless. Gondor made no answer, it says here. The crown was claimed by Eärnil, a victorious captain. Arvidue did not press his claim because he had neither the power nor the will. Yet the claim was never forgotten by his descendants, even though he passed away. He was indeed the last king, as his name signifies. The name was given to him at birth by Malbeth the seer. And she gave a proclamation to his father. Though a choice will come to the Dunedain, if they take the one that seems less hopeful, then your son will change his name and become king of a great realm. If not, then much sorrow and many lives of men shall pass until the Dunedain arise and are united again. And only one more king followed after Eärnil. It says Eärnil was a wise man and not arrogant. He sent messages to Arvidue announcing that he had received the crown of Gondor. But it says, I do not forget the royalty of Arnor, nor deny our kinship. Nor would I wish that the realms of Elendil should be estranged. I will send aid to you when you need it, so far as I am able. So he's trying to maintain diplomatic relations. However, he fell under attack. Oh, and it says here, Arthedain was in great straits, and the Witch King was preparing a last stroke against it. Eärnil sent his son Eärnur north, but too late. When he reached the havens of Lindon, the Witch King had conquered Arthedain, and Arvedui had perished. It says here that when Eärnur came to the Grey Havens, there was joy and wonder among elves and men, because so great was his... I think this word, so great in drought, means depth, I think, if I remember correctly. I would have to look that up to be... but so many were ships that they could scarcely find harborage. Pretty sure that that's what that means. Their horses were also praised, and Círdan summoned all who would come from Lindor or Arnor. When the host was ready, they crossed the Lune, marched north to challenge the Witch King of Angmar and his dwelling in Fornost. There was a great battle. King fled northwards towards his own land, but before he could gain shelter in Carndum, the cavalry of Gondor overtook him. And at the same time, here comes Glorfindel, woohoo! The Elf Lord, riding up out of Rivendell. And so utterly was Angmar defeated that not a man nor an orc of that realm remained west of the mountains. That's pretty awesome. This is really cool. It says that when all appeared lost, the Witch King himself appeared, black-robed and black-masked upon a black horse, and fear fell upon all who beheld him. And he singled out the captain of Gondor for the fullness of his hatred. With a terrible cry, he rode straight at him. Eärnur's horse couldn't withstand the onset. It swerved and bore him far away before he could master. So his horse was like, "Screw this, I'm out." Witch King laughed and says none who heard it ever forgot the horror of the laughter. But Glorfindel, coming in to save the day, rode upon his white horse, and in the midst of his laughter the Witch King turned to flight and passed into shadows. Eärnur rode back, but Glorfindel told him, "Don't pursue. Leave him alone. He won't return here anymore. His doom is far away, and not by the hand of men will he fall." These words were remembered, says the captain of Eärnur, Eärnur, captain of Gondor, earned the chief hatred of the Witch King, though it was many years before this would be revealed. It says, during the reign of King Eärnur, as later became clear, the Witch King escaped, came to Mordor, gathered the other ring wraiths. It says, but it was not until the year 2000 that they issued forth from Mordor by the path of Cirith Ungol and laid siege to Minas Ithil, which they then took in 2002 and captured the Palantir of that tower. They were not expelled while the Third Age lasted, and that became Minas Morgul, as we remember from the read-through of The Lord of the Rings, from the, I believe it was in the Two Towers when they're going up the stairs. We talked about that. Also with Faramir, I believe there's a section talking about that. Says, although Eärnur was very physically fit and loved battle and everything else, he didn't want to take a wife because he only cared about fighting and armies. When he received the crown, the king of Minas Morgul challenged him to single combat. He's basically taunting him. You ran away when we fought in the north, because his horse ran away, right? You're a chicken. The steward, Mardil, restrained the wrath of the king in Minas Anor, which had been renamed Minas Tirith, ever on guard against the city of Morgul. The Lord of Morgul repeated his challenge 7 years later, taunting the king and saying, "Your faint heart of youth has now been added to with the weakness of your age." And the steward could no longer restrain the king, and he ran off with a small escort of knights to Minas Morgul. Oh, this is interesting. None of them were heard forever again. Mardil the steward ruled Gondor in his name for many years, and then the descendants of the king became few. Numbers greatly diminished since the kin strife. There was no claimant to the crown of pure blood. Therefore, as the years lengthened, the stewards continued to rule Gondor, and the crown of Elendil lay in the lap of King Eärnil in the houses of the dead, where Eärnur left it. There's a next section here. I'm going to briefly look at this to see if it's worth reading or if it's something for another episode, because it says here the stewards. Okay, there's actually a whole bunch of stuff on the stewards. So it looks like we're going to do an episode on the stewards next week. Okay. So, that'll be next week's episodes on the stewards of Gondor leading up to the return of the king. Cool. Well, hopefully I didn't bore everybody with this kind of dry reading. It's not a novel, so it reads a lot different than the rest of the book. But if you enjoyed, like, subscribe, hit the bell icon. Stick around for next week's episode. We are slowly working our way through this. I wasn't sure how many episodes the appendices would take, but it appears they're going to take a few because these are pretty big sections, and some of it's I'm skim reading. Also for a lot of reasons. One, I don't want anybody to claim that I'm reading verbatim and because in order to do fair use on YouTube, you have to make sure that you're doing critiques and everything else, which is what we're doing. You can't just do a read through. You have to be doing critiques and analyzing and discussing, which is what we do with these episodes, which is how you can do this and claim things that are fair use. But it is very dry because and that's why I'm skim reading a lot of this because it's like the son of the son of the son of the son of the son, and it's like I don't care. It's just there was war, many kings passed, 500 years went, and then we can talk about this king and what he did because there's actually an expanded history there. Anyway, see you next week, everybody.